Be self-aware. Know yourself, your strengths and weaknesses, your hopes and fears, your doubts and confidences. So this is one of those that self-awareness and authenticity, I mean, you can't really fully have one without the other. So they are deeply connected, but they're also a little bit different because the self-aware is more internal and the authenticity is more external. But it's hard to be authentic if you don't have good self-awareness. What does this mean? We should always remember that God has created each of us uniquely. We have particular giftings, which means that we lack in other gifts. Self-delusion, whether overly complimentary or overly critical, does not honor the God who made us. Our gifts have been bestowed so that they may be utilized in various contexts and groupings of other people who possess completely different, unique characteristics. So here in this, that self-awareness isn't just humility. All right, sometimes self-awareness is digging a little bit deeper into recognizing gifts that we have. All right, there are some people that say, oh, I could never do fill in the blank because I'm not good at that, or I don't have gifts in that, or whatever. Now, if that awareness of giftedness comes from having tested healthily the boundaries of your gifts, well, that's a great form of self-awareness. But if it's something that you've never tried, then to say that you can't do it, you might be lacking self-awareness. It may just be that you've never tried or that you don't want to try. So what are some of our helpful Bible passages? 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. Romans 12, verse 3. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. And 1 Corinthians 12, verse 1. Now, here, when you debrief at your leisure, you really want to unpack the entire chapter. But we just give the little bit that reinforces the notion of self-awareness. Now, about the gifts of the Spirit, brothers and sisters, I do not want you to be uninformed. So that's where Paul says it's important to know this, but everything he wanted you to know, we've omitted in the Small Catechism version. So this knowing who you are and what gifts and attributes you possess is obviously very important. But it also comes with measures of both confidence and humility. I mean, it interacts with a lot of different components, but it takes a lot of self-honesty to be self-aware. And we shouldn't have excess confidence or wrong excess humility. I mean, we should be aware of what gifts we have and we should embrace them. So here's one of the things that I find most curious and perhaps most disturbing in my work as a church consultant. I cannot tell you how many times I've gone into a church and they're having problems. It's normally why they hire a consultant. But we'll talk about systems theory in the afternoon, but you got to look at all the overlapping systems that aren't working great in a church that's got problems. And more often than not, this will be a congregation that identifies itself as very biblically based, all right? sometimes prideful in their description of how biblically based they are. And typically I interview a bunch of people, a random sampling from the congregation. And more often than not, I ask them about, what they've discovered to be a good spiritual gifts test or inventory. Well, they've never done that. Well, what are your spiritual gifts? Well, I'm not sure. They'll mention some things that don't sound like spiritual gifts. And it underpins this huge challenge that there's so many churches that think of themselves as biblical, and they reject everything that Paul taught about giftedness. And some of this, it's not random. I think some of it is a subtle and powerful reinforcement of a shift in the way that we train pastors after World War II. And we more intentionally were shifting away from discipleship and into professionalism. And the pastor was the one person who could do all that professional stuff. And so what's the point of helping people identify that they have the spiritual gift of proclamation if they're not going to become a pastor? And so we treaded too lightly on challenging people to become aware of their gifts. And because of that, we've for a couple of generations, we have stunted the spiritual growth of people by telling them they didn't need to be self-aware of their gifts. So long as they dropped something in the offering plate when it went by, we'd hire someone to do those things. And so they could just ignore that stuff about Paul saying that all of the members had necessary, interdependent, vital functions. So long as we hired somebody, didn't matter what your spiritual gifts were. Well, that's completely unbiblical, and it turns out from a variety of surveys of congregations, that it's not very healthy for a congregation either. So you need to be self-aware of a lot of things, including your spiritual gifts, your vocational gifts, and the other things that make you unique, both as gifts and as weaknesses.